All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Base Lunch and Learn. We have Nathan Hall here joining us and doing advanced containerization. Nathan, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, anytime.
Cool. Well, if anyone has any questions, they can send them to us on. All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Base Lunch and Learn.
Don't need to be
we have
listening to my own
Nathan Hall here
streams,
joining
so
us. Apologize for that. That might be a little echoey. All right, so Nathan, if you'd like to go ahead and get started, and yeah, any questions or comments, please ask in YouTube chat.
All right, so what we're going to be talking about today is battle hardening your containers, making them production ready. I gave a talk 4 months ago, and we're actually going to build upon that. So if you're playing the home game, this is the old place that we're going to start off. And what we did was we just Dockerized a basic Node app. So who's this for? This is for anybody that is currently using containers in production or using them for their CI/CD pipelines, or maybe you're just using it locally, but it's really slow for build times, or you're concerned about your image size. You've got Docker image issues. So let's talk about me. I'm a principal engineer at Clearco, and what Clearco does is non-dilutive equity financing for e-commerce founders and founders at large. And we're hiring, so if anybody wants to talk about that, let me know. I grew up in Birmingham and moved back a year and a half ago now, so I'm really happy to be back in town. And I've been using Docker since 2017. We had a new acquisition at an old company, and they had 15 different microservices running around, and trying to develop them locally was an absolute pain in the rear. And so that's how we got started using Docker Compose. There's my GitHub, my LinkedIn. If you got questions, maybe I should have Twitter. I don't know if that's like I'm old or young, and I don't have Snapchat or Instagram or anything else. So maybe I just need to get my social media account going up. But what we're going to talk about today, and the first one is the most important, is how Docker build works under the hood. What's it actually doing when you create a Docker file and you start with your base image and all the steps you run? Like what is Docker doing? What's it computing? And when does it have to invalidate its caches? And we're going to use that information to do the next 3 pieces, to talk about securing our container and actually hack into an insecure container and get some environment variables and secrets that have been exposed. We're going to talk about reducing the image size so that you're not dealing with gigabyte images across every time you have to do a new CI/CD pipeline build. Talk about speeding up the image builds, how we can make it so they drop from sometimes 10 minutes to do a Node app to seconds. And then lastly, we're going to combine that all together with multi-stage builds. So this is going to be pretty interactive. I'm going to be jumping back and forth between this and our old app. So I'm going to start by going over the 5 pieces that we're going to want to touch about the Docker build. When we run Docker build right now, and I have a screenshot of me running it up here. What we're really curious about is what happens with each step along the way. So obviously we know we have a base image, and if we don't have it already on our local machine, Docker daemon's going to go off and pull it from wherever the container registry is, or Docker by default. And then it's going to run our individual steps. The important part I want to look at here is these individual SHAs that are being created along the way. So this is how Docker does its layers and also how it does its caching. So if we were to change a step along, let me get back. When we talk about caching, what it's doing is, let's take the app, for example, or the package JSON. It copies from our host machine the package JSON file over into the container, and it creates this SHA. The SHA is actually a checksum of the contents of that file or group of files that it uses as its cache mechanism. So if we later go and change this package.json, it will invalidate this cache because it'll have a new checksum, a new SHA, and then it'll recompute everything as we go forward. So order matters. So let's actually watch this happen live. And that's what we're going to be doing a lot of. I got to open this puppy back up. So like I said, this is the old Docker node app we had from a few months ago. And if we want to actually look at it, I'm just going to build it real quick. It's running, so go back and we'll refresh our beautiful Sharks page. And it uses MongoDB, and you can add Sharks. It is ready for production. I think I've got some VC money ready to go, and we're all excited about it. But it's not ready from a container standpoint. So let's talk about what's happening when we run the Docker build command. So I have my base image. I create a working directory and I copy my package JSON. I install it, I copy the rest of the contents, and I tell it what to run in case anybody wants to start this. So if I'm going to start with the old Docker build process without build kit, and I'll get into why later. If I build this new container using this Docker file, like the image we saw on my screen not that long ago, we're going to see it going through, computing the checksums, the SHAs. It's going to run each step individually, and once it's done, it's going to spit out a final Docker image ID, which is this one. So you can actually go look at it in their Docker image list. It's generally the last one, latest, and we can do some cool things. Like we can actually go in and look at the Docker image. You can inspect it. And so there's some stuff in here that, I mean, I still don't even really know what it means, but some cool stuff is we can look at the parent SHA, which if we go back and look at the build is probably going to line up with the last command before it. So no DEO2, DEO2, they line up. But you can also see some other things like what's the command, the last command of the step of the Docker file that ran, what's the environment variable where we are now, and these layers that have been computed along the way to make this image happen. But I can go back in time. I can say, well, I want to look at the parent image that was used to create that, the final image. And it looks pretty similar, but same thing. We have a new parent that's going to be the step before that. So that's going to be the copy. And we can see that in the, that's going to be the expose. And if we looked at this parent, it would be the copy. Different environment files that are in there, different layers that were used to compute that. We can also look at the history of these Docker images. What commands were used to create them along the way. So the last part I want to talk about with this was order of these operations matters. So for node apps, what you saw in the old days a lot was people would say, well, I'm just going to copy everything over and then I'm going to run npm install. And why do you not want to do this? Well, there's actually two reasons, but from the CI/CD pipeline perspective, let's say we made a change and we put like, we wanted to, I don't know, get some more logging. But we didn't make a change to the package JSON. Well, because of the order that we have set this up, because I changed one file, everything after this, it's going to bust the cache here, and everything after this is going to rerun. So it's going to rerun npm install, even though I didn't change any dependencies. And you can see that if we just rerun the command with docker build kit, DC build docker toots. And if we watch it in action, we'll see that it's going to use the cache for everything up to the copy. And then it's going to have to rerun everything after it. So that's why, it's one reason why order matters. Another reason that you don't want to do this, or just this after you've installed everything, is this is a different operating system than Mac or Windows. And so when you have something like Node.jip compiling your C++ add-ons, and then you copy them over directly, there's a good chance they're not going to run, and your image is going to break, and you're going to have no idea why. So that is why we copy package JSON, we npm install everything, and then we copy the rest of the contents. So let's go back to our presentation. We have learned about history and inspect. We're going to park that information. We're going to come back to it. We're going to go inside to Costco, buy a few things, or Whole Foods if you're feeling a little more bougie. And we're going to talk about security. So there are a few base things that come with security that you should always be doing, especially for your production image. The first one is you want to pick a minimalist base image. So if we go look at the Docker file that I had, I selected Alpine. If you use the default node image, and maybe that's good for local development, it is 1 gigabyte versus I think 30 megabytes. And why is that? Well, it comes with a lot of extra things. It comes with Bash and Perl and OpenSSL and all these other things. But what they do is they create additional attack vectors that a hacker can come in and find a way into your container. And for that reason, I generally go with Alpine because it has everything I need and nothing I do not. Some people even go with Alpine without Node, and they install Node themselves and install the dependencies that they need specifically for Node and their build process along the way. You can do that. But you do want to use a minimalist base image. You do not want to run as the root user. This is a big one I see a lot that doesn't get added into the Docker file. Why do you not want to run the root user? By default, the root user is what, if you don't tell Docker file to use a different user, it will, that's what it's going to use. And so if someone hacks into your container, they will have pseudo privileges to run whatever they want across the board inside that container. But even worse, if they break out of that container, they will be the root user on the host machine. So there's, depending on what distribution you go with, I think this is Ubuntu, you are going to want to add, you're going to want to create a base user to use that's not the root user. Alpine comes with a default one, and we're going to go over that in a second. The next one is we don't want to add environment files across steps. So a .env file or a .npmrc file is what we're actually going to go over in a second when we actually hack our own container. And the last one is we want build args over environment. So the reason for that is build args do not persist once the image is created. This does. And so people, when they get into your container, can go and grab those environment variables. So let's do these two steps. Let's add our root user, let's add our non-root user, and then let's actually hack our container and have fun. So let's go back to our code base. So the first thing that I want to do is use our root user. So with Alpine, like I said, it's pretty easy. It comes default with a user that is called node. And so all we really want to do is after we copy over our contents, we want to change the ownership of our app folder that we set up here to be the node user. And then last but not least, we just want to say, hey, Docker file the user we're going to use going forward is Node. So there's not many changes, but there's just like a very minimal thing you need to do to remove root access to your container. So the next thing that I said is important is not to copy things like npmrc or your .env file. So what I've seen a lot in the past is, let's say you have a private repository or you have private stuff on npm GitHub that you need to have. You don't want to be publicly available, your npm token. And so what I've seen a lot is people will say, all right, I have an npmrc file, and it's got, this is secret stuff. And, it's probably in our Docker ignore. And so what people do is they'll say, all right, well, since I need to copy it so that when this runs, npm has access to it, but then I'm just going to remove it. So what's the harm in that? I got to tell it where to copy it. Copy npmrc from over here into our app. And let's run it. So that all seems good and well-intentioned, because if I go into the container, the final image that was built, let's see. I'll move it for now. If I go into our container and I look around, I won't be able to see that npmrc file because I removed it. But a savvy hacker is going to say, no. I know that there are Docker images and Docker layers that I can actually reverse engineer to get that information out. And that's what we're going to do. What we're going to start by is, as soon as this thing's done, is we're going to save the image as a tar, and then we're going to pull it out, loop through all the different layers, and from there we're actually going to be able to see the npmrc file and the secret that is in it. So, and we can look at the Docker history and say, well, it looks safe, I think. And we don't see, we have our copy of our npmrc here. And I don't see a secret in there. Good. So let's start by running our save our image, Docker node tutorial, Docker toots, and we'll save it to our current directory. That's going to create it over here. And then we're going to make a directory to save the contents of that Docker toots tar. Docker toots is just fun to say. And then we're going to take that tar and put the contents of it into the directory you just created. Is that the right directory? Yes. And we go look at it. Notice we now have a bunch of SHAs that look eerily similar to these ones that have been created along the way as the layers in the history of that Docker image. So if we look in the manifest file, so let me go in here and you'll see like the different layers are in here and you can actually view them. So there's somebody sneaky, and I'm not gonna lie, I didn't come up with this. I copied this off Stack Overflow, but somebody said, all you got to do is loop over everything that's in that layer.tar folder. And what you need to do is for every single one of those, you're going to grep for whatever file or whatever you're trying to look for, .env or an actual environment variable. And then we're going to echo out the actual layer that it was in. And I got 4. So what I can do is I'm just going to pick one, and I'm going to assume this is the right one, but I can do it on every single one, is take that individual layer and do the same thing I've been doing and output it into a new directory. So I'm just going to say app.npmrc. And if I look here, I've created this. And if I look in this new file, there is my secret. So if I had pushed this publicly up to the internet thinking that I had done this securely, like an environment variable or whatever, I have not. So people said, okay, let's remove those steps that we did, and instead of making a step, let's do one fell swoop. And this is what you see a lot. You see people saying, all right, I'm going to have an ARG token, or make this what you would, DB access username, password, whatever. And then I'm going to create the npmrc file on the fly. So I'm gonna comment all this out. Scoot this over so everybody can see what's going on. So I'm taking the npm token that I have, and I'm going to run npm install, and then I am going to remove it. And to do this, I need to add a build arg into my Docker Compose. I think it's just args. New token, baby. This is secure, right? So let's run it. I gotta go back to so let's run it. Docker DC build Docker toots. Oh wait, hold on. Docker build kit. And as that's going, we don't have to worry about the what we did previously, where we created these intermediate build steps where the npmrc file is there, right? So like you should be thinking, okay, well, it's gone. Well, unfortunately, with Docker, that's not actually true, and I'll show you in a second. I don't have time. Okay, here we go. So now, if I look at the history of this newly created, look at that. It's just in the damn history output. Like, that's not safe. Who thinks of this shit? Pardon my French. So what are we going to do to fix this? And I'll show you when we get to using Docker build kit and multi-stage build. But I just want to flag this because you see this all the time. Do not do this. If anything, if you remember anything from this presentation, these are the two big ones. All right, let's continue onward. So let's talk about Docker size. So we talked about minimalist base image for a security reason, but you also want a minimalist base image just because of how massive the base Docker image is for Node. And so there's perfectly good reasons why you'd want to use one of these over the others. Like if you're moving an old, PHP thing that's 5.3, is using CentOS, then it would be pretty hard to try to put that on Alpine. So there's perfectly good reasons to use some of these other operating systems and distributions, but when possible, you want to go with the smallest one you can, because A, it'll fill up your local computer, but B, it's expensive. Like, you got to store these gigabyte images on some sort of container registry. You gotta pull them across, doing ingress, and you get charged out the butt for that from your cloud provider. So the smaller, the better. Some other things you can think about are removing dependencies that you do not need that aren't production dependencies. So with with Node and npm, you prune your production dependencies. You install only production If you're using Alpine and you have to install a bunch of stuff along the way to make your build happen, so a good example is you need a Node.js to install some of these C++ add-ons. You clear the cache out after you're done with it. Docker ignore is another one. There's a lot of base things that should be in the Docker ignore that people forget. It's pretty similar to git ignore. The biggest thing that you want to add in Docker ignore that's not in git ignore is your .git. So a lot of your dot files, your configuration files you want to add, your configuration folders, they're not needed, and they get added. And when they get added, that build context slows down the build time, and it creates the image size. And then the other one is multi-step command when one step would have sufficed. So if we go back to that idea, so I'm going to work backwards on these. If we go back to the idea with this, like, well, let's say this wasn't a security hole, and you wanted to, I don't know, add stuff to the npmrc file from the Docker file. You can do this and it works fine, but if we take what we've learned about Docker and how it builds and how it creates layers, it's not going to create one file and add to it. It's going to create one file without the contents, and that's going to be what's stored for that checksum. And it's going to create another file and add your thing to it for the next iteration of that layer, for the new layer. So for something as contrived as this, it's not that much more. I mean, it's a small one, less than, I mean, it's probably a kilobyte file. But if you do stuff like this on the regular, it can really add up. So as much as you can, you want to avoid adding things that can be compressed into one step. So, you know, like for this one, you'd say, and something like that. Then when we talk about the Docker ignore file, this is a pretty good base one for Node. If this was TypeScript or a web app, you'd probably want to add your dist folder. Well, Fitty, I don't know how that got there. My hands are way off. Dist folder, because that's going to be computed inside the Docker container. But I'm not going to belabor this too much because we already talked about it. So let's talk about clearing out the cache. You know, if this is our production image and we've run through the test, then what we can do is, you know, after we've copied everything over, you know, and let's just pretend we have a test command. Then after we run the test, what we want to do is we would want to prune out anything that's not production. So, you know, with this tiny little app that we have here, it's probably going to be a few megabytes, but with, you know, something that is, I've had gigabyte node module dependencies, and, you know, 700 of those megabytes were non-production. So it can save a lot. So if we run the, then we remove our non-production dependencies and save a lot of space when we have our final image. And then the other thing is I talked about was like adding things for Alpine, like to be able to do Node.js. So you'll see that a lot with people adding dependencies for APK. So I don't remember all the ones that are required, but, you know, it's like JIP and Python 3 and make and some other stuff. What you want to do is you do that, and then you'd say, and then run the npm install.
And let me interrupt you for a second and just ask you a quick question. On the prune, on a multi-stage build, would you want to do that prune in your build stage and then?
It's a good question. And the last thing we're going to do is build a multi-stage Docker file, and we will do that there.
Cool.
But you would do that in, what a lot of people call the builder's base. You wouldn't want to do that until you get to like, from base as production, then you would do the print.
Awesome.
Back to this, you would add the stuff you need for Node JIT to run, and then you would delete stuff. And last but not least, you want to clear out your cache for APK. So basic things that you can do to reduce the Docker image size. I think we covered all these. So what about speed? Everybody loves speed. So I think, Docker 18 or 19, build kit, which was a separate thing, was added to Docker. And I think as of 20, it's been default. It's been default for a while now, but there's pieces of build kit that come default, but there's also pieces that people don't use a lot that are very helpful, especially for local development. And one of those is what I flagged here is the mount type. What this does is, it can be similar to a volume, but it creates a bind mount on your host machine that stores stuff across builds. And so when you think about it in terms of Node, there's two places where it's very helpful. One is with npm install. If you don't cache your Node modules by setting up a volume, like in your CI/CD pipeline, if you're using something like Jenkins, it can store your the Node modules on like the Jenkins host machine or whatever you're running your CI/CD pipeline on, and use those dependencies going forward. If you are running it locally, it will use the same dependencies and just add the new ones when you install something new, which is awesome. And then for production, you're probably not going to use npm install, you're going to use npm CI. npm CI will use the package.lock and wipe your Node modules every time you use it. That can be pretty timely and B, costly if you do that every single time you have a new pull request or a new build or anything like that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a cache using using build kit that we can reuse across builds locally, and you can also do the same thing for your pipelines. So let me go back. All right, so build kit. Build kit is, we're gonna ignore this npmrc thing because we're not gonna do it anymore. But it would be a part of the step if you wanted to. It'd be a big multi-line step. And what we're gonna do is we're going to say, let's create a new cache. We're going to give it an ID of, it can be whatever we want, like npm cache docker CI. And it needs a target. I generally set as an environment variable. And it could be, I don't know. I generally do this, but something that's on the root that's accessible. So then we come down and we say that npm cache folder. Then we tell it, okay, npm CI, I want you to use the cache where you can to save money and save time. And I want you to prefer offline, which means if you find this in the cache, when you delete the Node modules, use that instead of going up and pulling it and giving me a lot of dollars wasted to Amazon. So that's all we need if we run it. And notice I'm no longer using Docker build kit equals 0. It's 1 by default now. I also set that in my $C file, but and if we ran this again and you did like log level verbose or silly, you'd see like if we added a new dependency, like let's do it or not, like I'm not gonna do it. If you add a new dependency, it would say, couldn't find in cache, going to npmjs.org/block to grab. So that is pretty cool to me and saves a lot of time, especially development locally, but also when you're CI/CD pipelines. There's more to it than just this on CI/CD pipelines. Like you got to make sure that stuff this is somehow mounted on whatever's running, like Jenkins as an example. And if you're using something like GitLab or Travis or whatever, they have configurations to do things like this. But anyway, I've always been a big fan. So if we go back and look, the other thing to think about is you don't have to use Docker. There are other things out there. Buildup is a good example. And like what they like to say is that they're faster than Docker. I don't use buildup. I don't know off the top of my head anybody that does, but it's a container and it operates in the same way with the same API. So if you're curious, I encourage you to check it out. But we've gone through the security, we've gone through size, we've gone through speed, and what we want to do from these, we want to talk about multi-stage. So the problem that we have now is we've got this one image that's great for production, but we also need one for dev, for our local environment, for people to play around with. It has a different entry point. It's not node app, it's npm run dev. We don't want to prune out production because we need that stuff to run the tests. And we don't want to, we want to add stuff to it. We want to be able to run curl or, bash into it or other things. And so what we're going to do is do a multi-stage build. So the reason multi-stage builds are great is you don't need to have those multiple Docker files to handle that environment. And you can have multiple base images along the way to be able to create your final image or target images along the way. So the canonical example everybody gives is the Golang one. So if you have this not in a single file, the output from this compiled language is like close to a gigabyte. But when you trim it down and you only get the compiled code, it becomes like 10 megabytes. It's tiny. And so obviously JavaScript, we're not going to be able to get it anywhere near that small, but we can still get a lot of the niceties and we can trim stuff down along the way. So that's what we're going to do for this last little exercise. Going to go pretty fast because I want to save time for questions. But let's start. So the first thing we want to do is build our base image. So I'm going to actually copy this. There's a lot of stuff I'm actually going to copy. So here's our base image. And we give it a name. We say as base. And this allows us to reuse this step in subsequent multi-stage builds. I'm going to copy this stuff because we still want it. We still want our cache folder. We still want our npm token. I'm going to copy this because we want to install everything along the way that we need. And then I need to copy the package JSON actually. And then I am going to install everything. Oh yeah, copy everything else into app. I guess I need to set my working directory too. Okay, so this is going to create the base image. What can we do with that base image? Well, for starters, we can say, from this base thing that I just created, I'm going to create a new local image. And this will be used for local development. I'd call it local development if I wanted. Let's just say local. And everything is installed, but maybe I want to be able to, bash into this container and be able to run curl and stuff. I want my port exposed, and I have a different entry point. My entry point for this one is npm run dev. And that's going to be different than our start command for Node app. So we go back. We now have our base. And this is enough. Like by default, I could just run this and I could say, I just want this local image. And that's the last thing I want. And I could actually use that as my final image. So if I say, start this puppy back up again, it should, entry point. Maybe I need to set the working directory again. I gotta build it again. I had a space that didn't seem to like. There we go. And you see it's listening. And I imagine if I go and refresh, there's our sharks. Yay, they're still there. It's a beautiful thing, but that's great. Now we have a local spot, but we also want to have a production one. So for production, a lot of times, you don't want to take what's been installed. Sorry, you don't want to take the this image. What you want to do is you actually just want to copy the stuff over to reduce the size for this final image. So you can say copy from base everything that is in the app folder. I want you to put in my app folder. Then I want to prune the output to only be production stuff. And then I want to make it secure again because I don't want you to run as root user as it's a production image. And then the last two things is I just want to be able to run the app. So if we build this, there's a couple of things I want to highlight here. By default, the last one in a multi-stage build is the one that gets created. So everything this one needs in order to be able to build is what's going to get run. So this technically isn't going to get run. So if I say DC build Docker toots, that's Docker tots. See, this stuff's cached, and then we got our new stuff from production, pruning the production, and then it'll have this ready to run. But we have other options. We can say, along the way, we can say, well, actually, the other thing I want to show, our security standpoint. If I say Docker history, look at this finally outputted thing, notice that nowhere in here is the, oh shit, actually, I gotta do this again. Let me add this as part of the step. Run this. There's a lot of stuff I gotta do for this. I'm gonna echo and npm CI, and then I want to remove npm RC. So still using the mount cache, but I'm adding my npm token as I'm going. So let's see what that looks like. Because I just want to show you that it's no longer visible in the history. Notice like everything doesn't have an image ID anymore. There's missing. You can't actually look at them. But more importantly, it's only going to show the pieces that were used for this. It's not going to show any of this nonsense. So if I look at that, my copying of that npmrc npm token is no longer visible. That's kind of what I want to show. But the last thing I think to talk about multi-stage builds is targeting different outputs. So if you're using Docker Compose, you can say, I want to, what's it, target, it's like target build or something. I gotta find it. I think it's just in part of the build context, you say target, and then whatever you named it in the Docker file. So for ours, we want local development. But you can also do stuff like say, I'm going to build the, without Docker Compose, because you're probably not using Docker Compose in production. So I'm going to give it a tag and I'll say target local. And that will build the local version, or you can say production. The other way to do it is if you want to build local, at the very end, you could just say from local. And that will accomplish the same thing as saying target. So what this does is accomplishes everything that we were worried about. It takes care of our security concerns. It reduces the image size. We're still able to get some of the performance boost out of using our build kit. And it makes everybody a lot happier. At least it makes me happier. And that's good enough for me. So continue reading. This is my favorite book. It's called The Lost Art of Reading the Effing Manual. And I think it really is a lost art. I haven't found like a good Docker book, or there's some stuff on like Udemy that's pretty good. Like Brett Fisher's been pretty useful. I can add him in here, but I do have links to Build Kit and different things that it does, and how multi-stage builds work, what they do under the hood. And that's all I have. I'll open it up to questions.
Sweet. Well, so far, no questions from the audience. We have 14 to 15 consistent viewers viewing, and there was a video issue for the first like 12 minutes, part of it, where your video was frozen for part of the time. Other than that, everyone's been watching, and I know I've gotten a lot out of it. I love the multi-stage stuff, and I didn't realize that the difference between the systems was so huge. Like the size difference, that's incredible, right? We're talking about 6 versus, so, and in fact, I have node builds running in production that are still using the default node containers. And just last night, I was like, holy crap, why is this 650 megabytes worth of stuff? And that makes a lot of sense. So I'll be converting some stuff based on this. Very cool.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping for, is just to get a little glimpse of what's going on under the hood. But if you understand what's going on with the build, it makes speeding it up and security a little easier. So
yeah, I didn't realize about the layer thing too. Like that's, so if I definitely have a lot of optimization, and we got some thank yous going from Marquise, and we got our first question from Ricardo. Do you recommend using Python, Node, Go base images instead of starting with Alpine?
That's a good question. And I'm going to say it depends. Like I have seen people that really know what they're doing. So, as an example, instead of saying node 14, would say I don't from Alpine as base, and then they would say run apk add update, Node.js, and then whatever other those JIT Python 3 blah 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 to make it work. And I'm going to say personally, no, I don't, because I feel like the people that have created these containers know the Node Alpine one no better than me, that what actually I need to run. Like I can make it happen, but for the most part, I haven't seen the benefit. And I'm by no means a security expert, but the only reasons that I really want to do that is there's like some glaring security holes in the base image for Node or Python or whatever. And most of the time, you got those security scanning tools that take care of that anyway.
So you're recommending using the Alpine version of the base images?
I do recommend using the Alpine version of the base image. So whatever this was, I recommend using like that. But do not use the latest. Do not and lock it down like as tight of a version as you can. And some people even suggest, instead of using, like this, especially if it's not something you see a lot, like you can actually use the whatever it is. That locks it down even more, because like somebody goes and updates the 14.15.4 Alpine, you'd have no idea. So that's something else to consider.
And then, I guess another thing is to have your own copy of it, right? To not use public images, but instead have that image be downloaded to your internal company's, container registry, and then scanned, and only utilize that copy, not the publicly provided one.
Yeah, and if you're using the SHA, like that's less of a concern because you can't really edit it. It'd be different, but that's definitely good practice to do in general.
Cool. All right, thanks, Ricardo. And I think that's all the questions we have. So thanks, Nathan. This was awesome. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you guys tonight. There's a game developer meetup, and then next month we'll probably do remote again. And if anybody wants to speak on DevOps or a JavaScript topic or anything else, please reach out to Base or myself. And hope you all have an awesome Thursday.
All right, thanks.